about us, and it's time to bow down. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bow Down. We are so excited to be here with y'all today. Dennis, I'm excited to be here with you and chatting and returning to Biblical Womanhood. I think the Madonna, Mother Mary episode was, personally for me, there were a lot of insights in that episode. So I'm really excited to see where this episode goes. How are you feeling?
Well, first of all, it's as always wonderful to be here with you. You are glorious, magnificent, and as always brilliant, Queen. So it's always a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to see where we go as well. So we're all about talking about Jezebel. Even the name. Just even before we start, what does that bring up for you? I guess when you hear that name.
You know, it's so funny because the first thing in recent time that really brings up Jezebel is the Harry Styles song, Little Freak. And the opening line is literally Little Freak Jezebel. And I remember it's on his most recent album, Harry's House. It's my favorite album he's created, and I'm a big fan of Harry Styles. And I think even just hearing that song for the first time, and it's really framed as like a loving position to put someone in. It's almost like my little freak, my Jezebel, which is interesting in that it's like, are you trying to kind of own and be in a taming of the shrew sense, like be the man who can handle the Jezebel, but at the same time it doesn't paint a pretty picture of a Jezebel woman throughout the song. It's a really kind of messy song, actually, and I just really loved that, and it's one of my favorite songs on that album, and just kind of kept coming up for me as I was doing some brushing up on Jezebel as a biblical character, that like what does it mean to associate with like being a little freak? It's like that is a kind of aggressive thing to call someone, but at the same time it's like, yeah, we're all a little freaky, you know, and
right.
Owning that is also really empowering and really cool.
Nice. Yeah, that's that makes sense. And you know, for me, I think, growing up in the church like I did, it was sort of shorthand for wickedness, right? You know, and this idea of the Jezebel spirit, and that was something that, at least in some of the churches I attended growing up, that was thrown around a lot, and generally used to control anyone who would get out of line. And didn't necessarily even apply to women only, actually, at some of the churches I went to. I remember one time when one of the church members, I guess, who did a lot in the church, wanted to start his own church. That day, the head pastor put out a very strong message about the Jezebel spirit, meaning being rebellious and being directed very pointedly at this gentleman who just sat there and took it. If I were him, I probably would have walked out, because knowing what I know now. But so that's what comes up for me. So I'm excited to dive in and see where we go.
Yeah, right off the bat, that makes me, because this is something that I think has come up a few times as we've been doing this podcast and having these conversations, but that I'm really curious about is the way in which these feminine and womanly archetypes still do speak to men, right? Like clearly the Lilithian archetype speaks to you so strongly. And it's interesting because I think typically we see them as a way to oppress women, right? Traditionally. And yet in this case that is like just about as traditional as you can get in a Christian church, it's calling a man a Jezebel, that he's holding the Jezebel spirit. What does that bring up for you as a man who has an affinity with feminine archetypes, that it can also be used as a way to critique different types of masculinity, along with womanhood.
I think it points out that, as we talked about in a previous episode, this idea of the sublime feminine, and how these archetypes aren't necessarily, they can be genderless in a sense, and the same weapons that are used, to primarily hold down women can also be applied to men as well. And I would say that if that's true, then the opposite is also true. So in some senses, it's a good news situation, because then as a man, you can own that as well, and use that, the idea of, okay, well, what does it really, and examine it. What does it really mean to be a Jezebel? Why is that gender specific? Again, if it can be used negatively, it can also be used positively. So that's what that brings up for me, is the idea, well, okay, if you're let's explore it, and let's understand what that means, and why do we assume it's bad? And history is written by the victors, right? And in this case, as we sort of dive a little bit into the story that's actually in the Hebrew text, recognizing who the writers of that were, the victors, if you will, in that battle, I think there's a lot that comes out that maybe will reframe Jezebel and what maybe really the story is really about, the subtext that, as the non-victor, gets hidden.
Yeah, I do think it's so interesting that it's like, even we see it throughout the Christian text, but in other cultures as well, that the feminine is just associated with the negative, right? That even like the yin and the yang, yin is negative. It is dark. It is the feminine. And yang is positive, light, masculine, right? And in Garden of Eden, we've talked about this before as well, that Eve is the one who succumbs, right? And then manipulates Adam, and Adam kind of throws her under the bus. It's like, well, it's not my fault. She did it, And so it is interesting to think about what it means for these things just to innately be tied to femininity. But I like what you said about how if one is true, so must be the opposite, that it's like the very tool for your oppression can potentially also be the it's almost like if a dagger has been stabbed into your heart, you can take it out and now use it as your weapon to defend yourself, right? Like it is now, you've given me this weapon by using it to hurt me, but it's now mine and I can now hold on to it.
I like that. Yeah. It's about, it's all about what meaning you take from it, and owning the meaning that you choose, because we're free to choose the meaning we want. And again, I think just ownership is so powerful, of saying that these are the characteristics I want in myself. And exploring what that is, and saying, you know what, I'm going to take what was meant for harm and turn it into a badge, into something that I'm proud of.
Well, and you know what? We humans are inherently meaning makers. That, like, we are meaning making machines, and no matter what we do, we are going to make meaning. And I think it is really just a choice whether we want to be an active agent in that process or a passive one. And I think even once we've kind of elected to step into being an active agent in our meaning making, there is still, at least for me, don't want to project, but so maybe it's just self-report, but this feeling of like, oh, I'm going to be an active agent in my meaning making, but doubting the meaning that you're making along the way, right? Like, oh, if I'm in control of this, am I doing it wrong? Is this a bad way to make meaning? Is there a bad way to make meaning? And like, if I'm doing this, am I stumbling? And it's like, no, you own it, because you've chosen to make meaning in this way. Like, why are you the one removing that ownership from it after the fact from yourself too? So yeah, that's really powerful to me, that it's like, don't just choose the meaning, but own the fact that you chose the meaning too, right? It goes beyond just the choice into embracing the power of the choice in and of itself. I do think, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I thought you were going to say something. I was just going to redirect us and say I think now would be a great time to go into the text and actually talk a little bit about what we see in the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of key things. I think the first thing that that came to me was that, we kind of think of, oh, well, Jezebel, she's a bad girl, right? I mean, that's probably the first thing people think of. And you can look at that from a sexuality perspective, from a witchy perspective, from a demon, whatever you want, demonization perspective, however you want that. The fact is that she was a Phoenician princess. She married Israel's king Ahab and became the true power behind the throne in the story, which is, I think, part of where this demonization has to occur. I mean, look at what she did. She wrote royal decrees. She used the king's seal. She hosted her own court. And something interesting to me is that the Bible never calls her queen. Maybe because the writers couldn't stomach granting that kind of legitimacy to a woman, especially a foreign one. So she was a woman ruling in a man's world. And the story, the biblical authors, make sure to underline her otherness, just by never even giving her the title that she clearly was acting upon.
Wow.
So that's the first thing. I don't know, how does that land? Does that for you?
I think it's interesting in biblical scholarship and literature. It's really important to think about the fact, even if you do believe that these are, inspired by the divine and it is the word of God, it's like that's still being translated through human hands. And we know that comparing gospels to each other is a really great place to see this, that so many of them share exactly the same sources and are trying to communicate a similar or a slightly slanted meaning. And so in thinking about the rhetorical choice to not use that language to describe her is, just very clearly, like what you said at the beginning, history is written by the victors. Like, that is not something that is assigned to her. And there's also this image of the husband may be the head of the house, but the wife is the neck that turns the head, right? That there is a subversive power, that this framing has always been used. I don't know. I think it's complicated in twofold, because on one hand, there is something deeply empowering about saying, yeah, sure, you're the head, but I'm the neck that turns the head. I'll let you think that you're in control, but really, we all know who's in power, who's in control, who's calling the shots. But also, is that framing not just another way to keep your thumb on top of someone, to keep them in the shadows, and to keep their power suppressed because you can't be the head? So it's sure, you can have some power. You can think, that you're controlling me too. It turns into this weird, sure, let the women think that they have this kind of power over us to placate them. That there is this kind of narrative there. And even there was a clip that went really viral, and I'm going to forget the man's name, but I found it through a woman that I really love. Her channel and content and everything is called No Nonsense Spirituality. And she is a wonderful resource for anyone going through deconstruction, but still feeling especially deeply spiritually connected. And she had a response to this video of a church leader who was talking about how we need women in the church, and women turning away from the church right now is the thing that is going to cause it to fall and crumble, because women have always been the backbone of the church. You've been the reason why children are looked after, why community is built, why we have potlucks, why when a child is born or we lose a member of the congregation, there are meals at that house, right? Why charity's done. Women are the backbone of this community. We need you. And that is why men have been able to stand on the pulpit and give so many powerful sermons that convert people. And it struck a chord with a lot of women, specifically religious women, that were like, do you not see that this is the problem with why women are turning away from the church, is because you're saying you're so powerful in your domain. And No Nonsense Spirituality had such a beautiful response in saying, like, I don't hold judgment for you thinking this, because this is what you're taught. This is the system of the church. This is exactly how it operates in order to maintain its power structure, its hierarchy, its balance. But you need to think about the things that you just said and how you think that that's really empowering to women. And every single woman, even women that agree with you religiously, disagree. So I suppose that's a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, I think there is this inherent, with Jezebel, power struggle between let women have a little bit of power so that they don't want more, right? It's like almost that if you give a mouse a cookie, hopefully it won't want anything else. But we all know what happens if you give a mouse a cookie.
Yeah, and well, what's really interesting too, I think, with respect to what you were saying, is that in the story, Jezebel really does have power in a sense. Like as an example, when her husband Ahab was wanted Naboth's vineyard, I think it was, she didn't just stand by; she actually took over. She forged letters. She weaponized law and religion to get what her husband couldn't. And, ironically, in the age we're in now, these tools, bureaucratic, savvy manipulation of the legal systems, I mean, we're kind of seeing that a little bit, I think, in our country. That's been celebrated in great male rulers for centuries. But when you look at Jezebel, they made her the villain.
Yeah.
And even her message to her husband reminded me of Lady Macbeth, to some degree, where she says, "Do you now govern Israel?" Shaming him for not acting like a king, and then literally rolling up her sleeves to do the dirty work herself. It reminds me of Macbeth with, if I, where Lady Macbeth goads her husband to take action, and
Yeah.
And so I think that it's interesting that, I think compared to perhaps other narratives in the Bible of women, how Jezebel is so vilified because
Right.
she actually did have power, and again, that's scary,
Yeah.
to the powers that be.
I love this comparison to Macbeth. Macbeth is like, how can you not love Macbeth, right? It's of course one of the easier Shakespeare stories to follow, so it's a really great intro, and I think that's part of why so many people like it. There's not all these weird subplots going on like there are in some of his other works, but we get such a strong woman, and there is a theme throughout Shakespeare of the strong woman that goes crazy too, right? And so it's interesting to think of that parallel here, but I think that's such a perfect example of like, what does queen mean, right? What does that title mean? And clearly it means something. Otherwise, they wouldn't have left it out of the text.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, because there's other
yeah.
queens mentioned, the Queen of Sheba in Solomon, and who went to see Solomon, and so it's not like the word didn't exist.
Yeah.
It was very very clearly around, but to not do so, and here's the funny thing. I mean, there's a double standard, right? So this story, you could say, is an illustration of evil, right? It wasn't his land, and Jezebel manipulated things to get it, and really makes her the face of evil, right? But King David kind of did the exact same thing, right? In plotting Uriah's death in order to get with Bathsheba, basically cover up his sin, and yet David is called a man after God's heart, and so. How can you hold the fact that on one hand, you have basically the same behavior, slightly different, but the same. In one case, it's celebrated, or if not celebrated, at least excused,
Right.
when it's a man doing it. But when it's a woman doing it, it's the face of evil. And I think
Yeah.
it exposes to me just how ancient that double standard is when it comes to a powerful woman who has ambition, who gets things done, and how it's always scared men.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think I love the use of your use of the word ancient, right? That it is this ancient tale, this cycle of vilifying women that are taking power back. And we'll probably almost definitely talk about Mary Magdalene eventually, but it makes me think a little bit of that too, and how in even the Gospel of Mary, the other apostles are kind of scared of her. Like there's something unsettling about a woman being the one that Jesus trusts, because it's like this is a cause for concern. And I think that there is also something deeply unsettling to seeing a woman who has been categorized as maternal, nurturing, caregiving, right? Like you see this, the idea of like the virgin, right? That we even talked about with the Madonna a little bit ago. The perfect woman who is a mother, who is nurturing, who is maternal, who is able to give birth while still being perfectly pure. And this idea of like the Virgo, the harvester, the one who brings about abundance, perfect calm and elegance, and wields perfect power over just her domain. And now it's like, okay, wait, I liked that you had this power, this ability to do these things when I could tell you how to use it. Right? But now you have an idea, and like you said, Jezebel is kind of telling King Ahab, like, step it up. Like, what are we doing here? And that's kind of the twist of the knife there, almost, that it's like, oh, I'm not okay with you telling me how to wield power. Maybe it's okay for us to talk about the different ways in which we are powerful, but your power should come from nurturing, from caretaking, from being able to build up, not from deconstruction, theft, all of these things. And I think what you said too about, comparing the different narratives we see and how they're kind of couched and presented to us is really important, because that's how a lot of biblical scholarship is done, is in comparing these different narratives and what they mean to the people writing them. That's how we know like what certain Hebrew, the intent behind certain Hebrew words, and how they were translated through the Greek and how the Greek Septuagint used them. That's how we kind of understand like, oh, well, this word actually meant young woman in this context, and this one means virgin, but now we have the same word for it, and really deconstructing it. So I think it's important. That's a really powerful way to be deconstructing the text too, is looking at the ways that it is compared across the text and within different authorship, and how people present the things radically differently.
Yeah, totally. And I think another great example of this is in the story, and actually one of my more favorite stories in the Bible, actually, of the showdown between Elijah and the 450 prophets of Baal. And remember, so Jezebel was a follower of Baal because of where she came from, and I'm not a scholar in this by any stretch, so I don't want to get too far out over my skis. But in general, at the time, different deities had their own sort of geography, which was why in Lamentations and when the Israelites are in exile, it's how can we worship, because they were no longer in the geographic area where they could worship Yahweh. And in that story, of course, is fascinating because it's sort of like a contest. Who can who will answer first, right? And the 450 prophets of Baal are chanting and doing all of this, and nothing happens. And Elijah comes out and starts mocking them, even saying, if I remember the idiom correctly, like, you should scream a little bit louder. Maybe your God's on the toilet taking a dump, and that's why he's not answering. If you actually, the idiom that's there, it doesn't really say that in the text, in the English or King James, but that's kind of the impression. And then of course Elijah comes in, calls down fire from heaven, and burns all 450 of the prophets. And then Jezebel, orders his death, and so growing up and reading that story, it was again to show how terrible Jezebel was, right? How evil she was. But again, pull back and what are the series of events? Like her religion, 450 of her priests were just essentially murdered. And so she went out on a reaction, and of course she went after the guy who basically did it.
Well, and basic,
again,
basic, like the justice system, like going back to Hammurabi's code, like we used the death penalty so frequently, like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Of course, now we have a more nuanced understanding of it, and I don't personally agree with the death penalty, but it's interesting to think that it's like, no, if you kill someone, like even one person could cause someone to call that life into, could put your life in jeopardy, that you killed someone. So now your life is in jeopardy because that's just one person. What gave you the right? Then we have the basic trolley problem of, would you pull the lever to kill one and save five? And overwhelmingly human beings say, yeah, we would pull the lever. It's just like basic utilitarian intuition, right? 400? Just because they worshipped the quote-unquote wrong God? So not only is it prophets of her religion, take religion out of it. It's human beings, right? It's like, you just killed 400 fucking people. Yeah, I think your life might be in jeopardy here.
I mean, put it in modern terms. Let's just imagine in our world, in the United States today, if a non-Christian, let's say Muslim or Hindu or whatever, killed 450, or incited a crowd to tear apart 450 Christian pastors, what would happen in this country? Like, just imagine what would happen. What would be, I mean, look what happened after 9/11, 20 plus years ago, and how it's changed the world. What would happen? And would it be justified? What would the justifications be in our world today if something like that happened? And even it's
put
wild
the shoe,
to think that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And even maybe giving the reaction, the benefit of the doubt separate from some of our leanings potentially. What if it was one Christian who called down holy fire and incited of violence to rip limb from limb 450 Muslims? Is that not actually, now that I'm saying that, it's like maybe we are witnessing that a little bit in Gaza right now. And how is the world reacting to that?
Yeah.
I think obviously that's complex and it's hard to draw direct comparisons here. So I don't want to get us too far off the rails, but I think your point stands, right? That the idea of vilifying someone for thinking someone who called down holy fire against 450 people is kind of wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's just to think about the story that that's being told there, and how do we interpret it today? How would we interpret it today? Because just to be clear, Elijah called down the fire to burn the offering, and then I believe the people rose up against these prophets of Baal. So it wasn't some supernatural event that destroyed the supernatural event incited the people to essentially stone or kill these prophets. So again, imagine that's, and again, replace Christianity, replace Christianity with any religion. You can do it in any
Right,
combination,
right.
but it's this idea that, we accept that story, or I did for many years, as a good thing. Like, look at the power of God. Wasn't it a great thing? And how evil this Jezebel was to go after Elijah because of this. But again, it just shows how, the meaning we make of things depends on where we sit, right? And
Yeah.
if we just step back and take a look at it, it changes everything. And I guess it's about empathy. I mean, I guess here we're talking about empathy again, right?
Yeah.
Like understanding what it feels like to be in that other position.
Right.
And again, that was, I grew up thinking that was acceptable because these were heathens, right? These prophets of Baal were devils, demonic, and they deserved it. That's the subtext there. But we have to ask ourselves, is that who we want to be?
Right.
I think.
I mean, even the other Old Testament story that is referenced quite frequently in these kind of anti-apologetics narratives, and I'm going to forget exactly what the passage is, because if you're no Bible scholar, I certainly am not. But the calling of the Israelites to cleanse Canaan, I believe, of all of the people. And it says, like, kill men, women, children, the animals, and anyone who runs away and gets free, bring them back and then kill them. And then, of course, the natural response is, well, they had the option to leave. It's just if they didn't leave right then, that's when the cleansing begins. And it's like, that doesn't sound very Christ-like, and that doesn't sound like, would you leave your home? All of that to say, your point about look at the seat that you're sitting from when you view these stories, right? It's really time to interrogate what your frame of reference is built from and what seat you are sitting from when you watch it. And that is basic human empathy, is to say, oh, wow, I do have all of these preconceived notions. What does someone else's seat feel like?
Well, and just to say, do I feel good about this when I really examine it? It's not to criticize. I hate to ever come across as critical of what people believe, because most of the time it's what they've been taught. And it doesn't necessarily come from a place of hatred or anything else. And I mean, for some people perhaps, but I think it's never been questioned, because questioning isn't safe. And so I guess I'm saying question the narrative. And think, if you choose to still believe, okay, that's your choice. That's the great thing about it. You can still choose to believe that, but don't take the time to critically think about it and say, wow, what is this story really saying, and how does it apply to me today? Is this what I would want to see? And if it is, it is. If it isn't, though, then you have to take action for yourself and say, okay, well, how does that change me?
Going back to what you said at the beginning, owning the meaning that you have made, right? Like, owning the choice in the meaning that you have made. It's like, that means thinking critically about making the meaning and making that choice and making sure that it lines up with any number of criterion you want to use. But then once you've made that choice, own it. Like, if you're saying you believe in X, Y, and Z, like, put your money where your mouth is. And if there is something in that is inconsistent or dissonant, like, there are all sorts of ways that you can, still retain a religion and make it work for you, and say, oh no, of course I decry, like, the actions of the Old Testament God, but I really follow Jesus. And if that is the way that you make it make sense for you, regardless of any sort of, logical or philosophical logician's arguments against it, that's fine. You're allowed to hold that belief. But you better own the inconsistencies that are there. and be able to say, yeah, I get that there are inconsistencies, but look, it makes me live life the way I believe is the right way to live life, with kindness and love and, these universal qualities that we believe to be a good thing. You can't just say, I guess you can. I don't think you should just say, well, just don't think about it.
Right. Don't think too hard.
Yeah.
Don't look behind the curtain, sort of thing. And I mean, the problem is once you start pulling that thread, man, the whole sweater unravels real quick.
Ooh,
so
yeah.
it's not for the faint of heart. It takes courage and it takes bravery to examine that.
Yeah.
And not everyone's up for it. But I suspect that our listeners might be. And I hope that we're able to reach them and just putting it out there.
Yeah. Well, and again, not saying that you can't still identify as a Christian or the beautiful parts of the religion, right? That the thing that I always really loved about it when I did consider myself to be a Christian was that it's a religion of love. And it is the only religion whose savior is crucified, like, in a brutal, like, thief's death, right? Like, not an honorable death, not a pretty thing, but that the crucifixion is hard and ugly and damaging, and it's to spread love. Like, there are some good things in that to hold on to. Like, and so not to criticize that you can't still find a way to make it work for you, but you have to find a way to make it work if you want to live awake, right? For lack of a better term. I think that term gets thrown around a lot and kind of sounds pretentious, but yeah.
I think it's authentic. To me, it's, do you want to live authentically and own, you take ownership of what you choose to believe versus putting your fingers in your ears and going, la, 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 I can't hear you. Don't look to, it's about authenticity. And again, it's okay, to your point, to say, you know what, I get it. But, this is still what I believe. This is the message I believe, and I choose to continue to believe this. But I have a lot more, I don't know, I think it's just a lot more honest and authentic to say I've done that. And I mean, the very fact is most of us don't choose our religion.
Right.
It's chosen for us based on where we're born. And it's much more powerful when you choose for yourself that this is what I'm going to believe, because you have that right, because you are the creator of your beliefs.
Yeah.
I just, do it consciously, not unconsciously.
Yes.
Wake up. And again, I guess the idea of woke, which is kind of a bad word
right.
now, but it just means do it knowingly. Like choose. Don't just have it chosen for you.
Again, be the active participant in the meaning making, not the passive one. And
exactly.
So I think, like, the at least long and the short of it for me is there a way to still be an ethical person and consider yourself Christian? Yes, of course. But
absolutely,
you need to, in order to live it authentically and with attunement to what matters, awareness and consideration of these things is being an active participant in it. And when you start to be an active participant, that requires some critical thought and deconstruction and hard conversations.
Agreed.
To take us back to Jezebel, another thing that came, we always go off on our tangents, but to another thing that came up when you were talking about this idea of her never being described as queen. I never thought about this before until you just said it, at least in terms of the Jezebel story, is what would it mean to call a woman king? Sure, these are gendered terms, But I think even then, there is a hierarchy inherent in a king versus a queen. Even if Jezebel was called queen, she's still not king. She's still one of her king's subjects, right? And yeah, I don't know. In this, I really like a word that you use quite frequently is sovereign. And I find that to be one that I really identify with, because it does remove this idea of gender identity from being able to be the ultimate authority over your path, your life, that you are your own sovereign and you are the one making these calls and choices. And even in the title of queen, is there something that is still, you are the neck that turns the head, not the head, because it is still secondary. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, going back to the Garden of Eden. I mean, it's just like somehow primordial. In our DNA, almost this idea of, one having to be the head, and somebody has to be the head, and somebody has to be the tail. And I mean, again, going back to the apocryphal story of Lilith, right? Because she wanted to be equal, not be the head, just be equal with Adam. She was cast out. Well, she chose to leave. Actually, she wasn't cast out. She up and went away. And I would also point out that she knew the secret name of God in that story, and Adam didn't. Just saying. So. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I mean, you see this in the New Testament as well. This idea of, a woman should keep quiet in church, the man is the head. Even though it's not 100% clear that that's what Paul believed.
Right.
That's fuzzy. But yeah, why can't both be the head? Again, why does it need to be one or the other? In particularly if it's a king queen, right? In this case.
Yeah.
Why do we need that? I think it's a deep question. What is the insecurity in men, I guess, that causes that to be the case? That's something that we see, again, going back to the word ancient. This isn't something we're just looking at today. I mean, this is something that's
Right.
been there forever. And why? I'm curious, maybe our listeners have ideas as to why.
I was just about to ask you why. What is it? And obviously, I think arguably the last few episodes and the continuing exploration of the conversation we're having in these episodes is the project of trying to understand that why, in part, so that we can uplift and speak truth to power in wanting to create this equality. But yeah, what's your gut instinct? If I were to mirror that question back to you, why? What is that insecurity in men? And of course, I'll let you off the hook a little bit and say, this is going to continue to evolve and change for you, of course, and there's no way you could possibly completely comprehensively answer this question in an hour-long podcast, much less, the next 5 minutes. But
no,
yeah.
I love that, because this is an exploration, and it's part of the reason why I'm so thrilled to be a part of what we're doing here. I know it's fear-based, because ultimately, whenever you try to push something else down, it's fear, and it's again this need that we have to other things, and perhaps for men, it's this idea that you're born of a woman, right? And you come out of the womb of a woman, you're totally helpless, essentially, and you're from your mother. You were in your mother's womb, and so maybe there's this ancestral sort of DNA of that vulnerability that men fight against their entire lives, because for the foundational, I mean, literally, their gestational period was inside of a woman. They were under complete, Now, I think it goes both ways, because I know when women are pregnant, they have cravings that they never have when they're not pregnant. So it is symbiotic even in that sense. I remember my mother would tell me how when she was pregnant with me, she couldn't get enough fried chicken. She couldn't get enough of all these foods that she would never ever eat on her own.
Right.
But at the same time, I was completely dependent on her. She smoked when she was pregnant with me, because this was back in the 70s, and that's what you did. And so in that sense, I was completely dependent on her, even in the womb. And then, of course, again, most in our culture
Right.
today, women do the vast majority of child rearing, and there is a special bond, I think, because literally you were in her, was were a
Yeah.
part of her. So maybe that's there. I don't. It's a curious question to see really where it comes from, because
Yeah.
why would we be so scared as men?
I
And
think
yeah,
it just, along with that, like kind of going back to this like almost like primordial but kind of ineffable feeling of like, I don't know, it's just baked into who you are. The other thing that came up for me too as you were talking is this idea that in our, clearly I am not a scientist or a biologist, but with your chromosomes, all fetuses start with female chromosomes, and then I believe it's XX, and then you develop the XY to become male. I could be so wrong about that, but I wonder if that's maybe, it feels related to what you're talking about, right? In this, if you start from female, if that is the foundation, the kind of baseline, is there this weird trying to like push against the thing that you necessarily relied on to survive, to become who you are? That is an interesting thought, almost in the sense of like teenage rebellion, right? It's extremely healthy and extremely normal when teenagers really begin to individuate, to rebel against the things that they're taught from their parents, because they're exploring their own identity separate from the things that they've been given. And I wonder if part of it is this kind of like lifelong rebellion against the idea that, I don't know, the divine feminine is where creation comes from. So no matter what you create, it can always be traced back to a woman.
yeah, or even just maybe the most traumatic event in your life is birth, and now all of a sudden you're separate. Like, so that's the first time you experienced separation as a man. And I don't know, I'm throwing things out there, but
Yeah,
just based
yeah.
on this idea of I didn't want to be separated, and how many times have you said I didn't ask to be born, sort of thing. Like,
Right.
again, it's this resentment of that trauma of birth, the idea of birth trauma, and my mother caused that trauma. A woman did the worst thing that I've ever experienced, from a subconscious,
Sure.
to get philosophical, this
Right.
legacy burden of the actual birth.
Right.
I don't know.
And
It's
if
fascinating.
Yeah, if we're going to continue that thought, because my gut instinct was like, well, that wouldn't really separate this idea of like a woman did the worst thing to me. A daughter could have that feeling too, but then also we have this idea of like internalized misogyny, right? Which is very much socialized, and just like the water that we swim in is a big part of why that exists. But it's like, well, that is an interesting thing to look at. If there is something kind of subconsciously there with the trauma of birth, that could impact women as well. That it's like this, all the things that I would not have suffering if it wasn't for my mother. Of course, you wouldn't have joy and experience and love and all of the other things, but I've probably said this before, but and I'm gonna forget the quote again. I'm so bad at remembering names. But I can remember the words that they say. But if suffering is not the project of all of human experience, then whoever created it did a really bad job. Right? That it's like that seems to be the common thread, which I kind of disagree with. I do disagree with, but I think the point stands that it's like any suffering that you do have is traced back to a mom who birthed you. And yet, we have all this discourse around, but women can't do it without men, right? You still need me. I'm still an active part of the biology, which is true, right? Like, you do need that, but a very different type of responsibility in terms of 9 months of gestation, going through pregnancy and birth and all of the things.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this will be a recurring theme in terms of really where does it come from? In terms of, is it simply because men are bigger and stronger on average? So as a result, it's a physical world. And so you take any advantage you have. I don't know, because I don't know. I'm curious. Maybe our listeners have some thoughts. Would love to hear it. I this is something I think there's a lot of hypotheses on.
Right.
I'd be very curious to. I don't think we're going to solve it, but
No,
it is cool to think about it. It's a different line of thinking.
Going back to this thing about like owning the choice of making meaning, it's like this is part of the work that we were just talking about, right? Like us not knowing that we're not going to get a great conclusion, knowing that we are like not experts in these fields, but we're going to diligently ask ourselves these questions and interrogate our gut responses, our answers, and then return to them and continue to interrogate them. At least I think that's kind of our intention, is to we're practicing the meaning making right now as we go.
And we're making meaning together. That's the great thing. And hopefully our listeners are able to join with us in making their own meaning. And
Very much so.
How they interpret it. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe going back to Jezebel. The last thing I'll say, I guess, or think about from a biblical perspective is her defiance in death. And the Bible says, the text says something along the lines of, she painted her eyes and looked out the window. And so when her enemies came for her, she didn't cower, she didn't run, but rather she put on her royal makeup and faced Jehu at the window, taunting him at the very end. This final defiant gesture. She chose to go out as a queen, not a victim. It's this old idea of, if you're going to go to the hangman, go with your head held high. And, so she says something, I think, is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master? Her pride and her refusal to be shamed in her last moments were her final act of power. And again, this goes back to the idea of selfishness, of pride. Pride goes before a fall. All of these different things that are thrown, these different aphorisms, these scriptures in some cases, thrown in our faces and in the faces of women to put them down a peg. And I love how in her death, she was still basically like, fuck you. Just like a final, I will not cower. I will not bow down. I will not run away. And I love that about the story, the fact that she was defiant till the end. It was over for her, and still, she refused to capitulate.
I will not go quietly.
Do not go quietly into that good night, right?
Right. Yes, I have goosebumps. I also love that she puts on her makeup. I think that makeup is such a complicated part about being a woman, and it's something I love so much. It is, to me, like an art form of the highest degree, and I think like drag as an art form is such a beautiful example of like the power of makeup. And it goes back to like theater and mask work and how you are perceived. Like, it really is a spell. One thing I actually learned in my Italian language class is that the word for makeup, or like the verb for putting on makeup is the same root of magician. It's like literally doing an
Wow.
act of magic because you're like performing a trick, which it's funny because in the class everyone's like ha 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 because makeup you're like tricking someone into seeing what you don't look like, but then of course my witchy brain goes to but it's like an empowered act of magic. It's like it's a perception spell, it's a confidence spell, it's all these things. And there is something about in the morning, I don't wear a lot of makeup on a daily basis, but I wear a little bit because it boosts my confidence. I enjoy it. I like the way I look with a little bit of makeup on. And it feels like a part of putting on your armor, right? In the same way that we're both wearing some pendants today. It's like it feels very similarly to me that when I put on my Cohere necklace or a necklace that my grandma gave me or something like that that carries this weight of like protection and power. That's what putting on makeup feels like. It feels like a shield and armor and a sword all at once because it's saying, I have power over how I am perceived. I get this control, and not everyone gets to see me at my most vulnerable. I get to decide how you see me in this way. So makeup is just such a powerful, powerful thing. Can it be used to also oppress women and make women feel bad? Absolutely. The makeup industry is one of the main culprits of like internalized misogyny and sexist marketing. It's crazy. Like the anti-aging marketing alone, we could get into all sorts of stuff there about the like idea of self-worth behind it, but reframing it as an art, as a magic of empowerment, I think has just been really powerful for me. I was someone who, when I was younger, on nights that I didn't have anything to do, I would sit in my bathroom and do my makeup and then take it off and do my makeup again and then take it off because it was fun and I liked playing with the colors and seeing how I looked and creating different eye shapes and feeling this connection to other women, that like this is an art form that we have for us. So yeah,
Yeah,
a
I
tangent
love.
on makeup there,
No,
but
I actually I think that's super powerful. I have so much to say about that actually, and it is. I don't even think it's tangential at all because, first of all, I love the imagery of and I love that way of saying putting on your makeup is similar to a magician. I think it goes back to again making meaning. If it's armor, but what meaning do you make of do you have to have it? And what situations do you have to have it? And I relate it back to my own neurodivergence and the masks that may not have been physical in the form of makeup, but were these different personas that I felt I had to put on. And if I didn't have them on, I felt naked and I felt
yeah.
afraid. But if I could put on that mask, even subconsciously, and not necessarily knowing how to do it. Now that I'm aware of who I am, I can put on those masks in a magical way.
Right.
Similar to what you described in terms of
In
putting
a
on
more
this mask.
conscious, aware kind of way too, right? Yeah.
Because I want to, not because I need to. That's
Yeah.
the difference. And that's what I think, I think and the other thing that came up for me is I feel like, and you'll have to, I want to bounce this off of you because I don't want to be, I want to make sure that it seems to me though that in terms of criticism of wearing makeup, it seems to me that women are much more critical of other women than men necessarily are of women about makeup. I know there's certainly men who are like, you don't look good without makeup and just say horrible things. But I
Right.
also feel like to some degree there's a lot of internalization there, that internalized misogyny as well, like, oh, look at her makeup, or things like that. I don't know what that came up for me as well, but
Yeah.
tell me if I'm right. And does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I don't know if I could really weigh like who is more who's more critical of makeup. Maybe I would agree that women are more critical. Who does more harm in their critique of makeup? that I think is maybe a little bit of a different story, but in terms of what you're talking about, there's absolutely something to explore there, because I think both parties and non-binary people, anyone can do harm in this realm. But it actually, in the episode that went out last week, we had a discussion about trad wives, and I was doing some research around that because I was like, oh yeah, we talked about that and I'm curious about this. And within a lot of the conversation around trad wives arises this secondary conversation of choice feminism and the idea of like, oh, but can you be a good feminist if you don't honor anyone's choice? Even if someone's choice is what you view as oppression, is like textbook oppression or textbook lack of freedom or lack of equality. Don't you as a feminist still have a responsibility to say, well, you get to make that choice? And where does that line fall between honoring another woman's choice, even if it's not the one, not just not the one you would make, but one that you think is actively harmful to her and actively harmful to the movement as a whole, and therefore actively harmful to other women, right? And that to me is kind of where I draw the line with this, that's no longer okay. And I think to kind of extend this metaphor of makeup with the trad wife ideology, there's a really big difference between enjoying quote unquote traditional feminine things, right? Like the cottage core is very much a thing, or like coquette aesthetic is back, and like wearing a cutesy bow and ruffly socks and like a prairie dress and being able to make homemade sourdough and like have kids and be a really great like homemade decorations and cake for birthdays. Like those are all really lovely things and absolutely not discordant with feminism at all. It's when these women then hop online and say, this is the right way to do womanhood, that it gets really harmful. And then when a feminist turns around and says, well, hang on, there's no right way to do womanhood. And then they cry, well, you're a feminist, aren't you? I'm allowed to make this choice. It's like you're not allowed to have that cake and eat it too and claim the power of choice feminism while also wanting to strip other people of their choices. You have to either hold that choice across the board or not. So within makeup, I think the same thing exists. That's like, you don't need to wear makeup. Like as a woman, isn't that inherently like subjugating yourself or performing for the male gaze? And it's like in some ways, sure. I actually don't know much about the history of makeup, but I would have to imagine like it becoming a capitalistic marketable thing was very much engineered for the male gaze. And I know that in the 50s, a lot of makeup was marketed as, making your husband happy when he comes home from work. That is very much a thing that exists. But at the same time, I think we do have a lot of spaces where women really support other women's artistry with makeup. And a trend that I really, really love online is watch me do my makeup so that men don't talk to me. And I think it's so fun to watch because women are just doing like funky, wild stuff that it's like, that looks really cool. Or honestly, like normal stuff, but like a green lip and an orange eye and like a few like dots around or something for fun. And it's like, the fact that that is just like playing around with color theory and your face shape, but we all know that that is going to scare men away. that absolutely is a thing that it's like, oh, but it's actually protection, right? It is because...
And I would argue that the men it scares away, it's probably for a good reason. So,
right.
Because to me, that's fascinating. Like that idea of using that and that's intriguing. I'm curious. Like, okay, well, tell me about this. Like, and that's so cool. The
other thing I want to throw out there too, to get your 2 cents on, which this is again, a broader conversation, and relates to the trad wife thing as well. There was this huge trend on TikTok. I'm not sure. I know you're not a huge social media partaker, so don't ever let me over-explain anything to you that you already know. But it was conservative makeup versus liberal makeup. And it started with this one creator who, I forget why she even decided to make the video, but it was essentially making fun of how conservative women do their makeup. And it is kind of funny if you look at like Fox News anchors. They all look exactly the same. They all have blonde hair. They don't know how to do their eyebrows, and they only have one shade of foundation across their entire face. And not to say that like all conservative women aren't a monolith, liberal women aren't a monolith, but there are these trends that you can notice and pick up on.
Patterns.
Right. And so it was kind of making fun of the fact that like you're performing for the male gaze, but you're actually not really good at this thing that we are trying to reclaim in this way now, as our own. And so then, of course, conservative women started doing, oh, I'm going to do liberal makeup. And liberal makeup was like bold eyeliner and like a colorful lip. And it's so funny to see, or like hyper contouring their face, because and clearly this is showing my bias, so I'll own that as I go into this. But it's so funny to watch these videos and see those conservative women finish putting on liberal makeup and kind of realize that they look good. Like they look better in the liberal makeup, because it's like, yeah, it's fun. You got to use the lipstick that you never get to use. You got to do something that like, why did you even buy that green eyeliner that you have? And now you get to use it, and it's like, oh, actually that does kind of make my eyes pop. Oh, actually, like I feel kind of pretty and it looks different. And then them having to perform this like, oh, but I look so ugly in this. It's just so fascinating to see how that works as it happens. And the fact that like, I think a lot of people, it just on the surface would look at makeup and say, oh, well, it's clearly like, if you think of like the archetype of the like blue haired armpit hair liberal feminist, right? It's like she probably wears no makeup. But actually, she probably does. And she's probably really good at doing her makeup. And she probably really loves it and has a lot of fun with it and does it for herself. Again, not a monolith, but I think that trend is really fascinating. And it's been really fascinating to see the way women are attacking each other in this way. Absolutely. This is women on women hate. Like men are not a part of this at all, except for witnessing. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's
Gut
interesting.
reactions to that.
I don't know, the first thing that came to mind, and this is dating me, I know, is this the Life cereal commercial where it's like, hey, hey Mikey, he likes it, or whatever the case
Oh,
is. With
yeah,
the
yeah,
kid.
yeah.
Like and but then pretending that oh no, I didn't really like that sort of thing. That was the first thing that came to my mind. But again, it goes back to this idea of masks, right? Like I really hadn't thought about what you said. I don't really watch conservative news very much, so and I don't, as you said, I'm not a big TikTok person, so. But it just what really came up for me was the idea of the I don't really see it as much anymore. Maybe the spam filters have caught it, but the old 419 scams that used to be where I'm the Prince of Nigeria or whatever the case is, and how those emails were always rife with very obvious misspellings and things that anyone would notice. And at first it was like, well, wow, why can't these scammers put together a cohesive sentence that makes sense, but then you realize it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's designed to not waste their time in terms of the audience. If somebody doesn't see through this, then that's their target. And so that's what comes to my mind too, in terms of this outfit, if you will, and the makeup is, and I'm sure the clothing is part of the outfit as well. I'm sure there's probably, similarities. There's this look, and the reason people do it is because it works.
Right.
That, I suspect. And what I'd be really curious though is particularly for these personalities who are forced to do, or who choose to do it. Maybe they feel forced to, maybe they don't. I don't want. But how do they feel? Would they?
Right.
What would it be like to? Would they prefer to have their own style versus being forced into, or feeling that they're forced into this style? And to me, I don't know. It resonates with me because there's a part of me being neurodivergent that feels that for so long I was forced in a similar way into a style of being this way as a human being.
Right.
So I never want to say I get it, and I don't want to try to put myself, I'm not going to be arrogant to say I understand what it's like to have to wear makeup a certain way, or feel that you have to, or feel that this is the dress code. But I get it from an emotional perspective, perhaps in my own way, in that for so many years I was forced to be, this masculine guy, and had to, even now I still sometimes with friends have to put on the sports face, or and not that I don't like sports. I'm perfectly fine with sports, and I enjoy football very much, and I'm certainly used to play basketball and love golf, and so I have nothing against sports, but it's not, I don't enjoy talking about sports very much.
Right.
But yet, in a group of guys, that 90% of the time, that's what you have to do. So to me, that's a metaphorical makeup I have to put on. Like if I know I'm going with a group of guys, I mean, sometimes I'll even do a quick scan of what's going on in the sports world so that I have something to talk about. Like
the classic, did you catch the game last night? And then the what game? And it's like,
yeah, it's like screeching, the brakes come on. And I don't know, I kind of imagine the same thing for imagine a book club, a conservative women's book club or something, and one of the women come in this liberal makeup, again, whatever that means. Like, does the whole thing come to a screeching halt? Like, what happens afterwards? I don't know, and what bravery it would take to do that. I admire women who do, as you said, have blue hair and put on just. I admire them so much because they're themselves, and that is the most beautiful thing of all. No makeup, great, like that's awesome. But you want to put on blue eyeshadow and yellow lipstick, awesome. Like that's what's so beautiful, because it expresses who you are. It's a way. It's just as, in one of my favorite movies is actually The Devil Wears Prada. And
it's such a good movie.
And I've watched it like 100 times. And in fact, we could do an episode, I think, on Miranda Priestley and who is actually the protagonist in that story, in all truth. And in fact, that's another topic, we should definitely look into. But, and I forget the character's name, but talks about how, fashion, and I'm going to get this wrong because I just thought of it at the moment, but, fashion is art that I'm going to get it right. Fashion is like art that you live your life in. And that's why it's so powerful. And I would say the same for makeup. It's fashion that you live your life in. And you can change it. Change it to suit your mood. Change it to, it reminds me of, maybe The Fifth Element as well, or in Hunger Games, at the Capitol, like all of the crazy makeup but almost a way to show who you are in that moment. Like one day you're goth because you're feeling that way. Another day, you're preppy. Another day you're conservative. Another day you're don't touch me. What a lovely way to be.
I will never forget the first time that I wore black nail polish. And I remember growing up, black nail polish and like cherry red nail polish both felt taboo to me, which who's to say why? That was certainly not a specific message that like my mom ever would have communicated. And not I'm trying to think if there would ever be something specific that's like, red is sexy, don't do that. Black is devil, don't do that. But clearly that was somewhere in there. And the first time I wore black nail polish, I was like, I am so edgy. Which it's like kind of silly to think about that, like that felt so like cool and empowering to me, but it's like that's the power of this stuff, right? That like 14-year-old Reese who felt all of the pressure to be like a perfect, nice, like the girl next door who was smart and kind to everyone and nothing was ever wrong, was allowing herself to wear black nail polish. It was like this little thing just for me to feel so cool. And it's like that is what this gives people the ability to do. And I think with this idea of like, even within you talking about your masks with neurodiversity and like choosing these things and the ability to like make a different choice, I think within like this image of the conservative woman walking into a book club with like blue hair one day and what would happen. I think within this idea of like choice feminism and respecting choices, the thing we have to be really careful about is the messaging that we are all indoctrinated into being a part of why we make choices. And that should we all have the perfect freedom to choose to do whatever we want with our lives as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else? Yes. We are not, like, we live in a society, we live with families and we are indoctrinated into certain ways of thinking. And you cannot say like that you're just offered an array of options that are equal in front of you, right? Like when you go to the food court and everything is created equal and you just get to choose where you want to go for lunch. That's really not how it works, because you've been told your whole life like pizza is greasy and bad for you actually, and it's gonna clog your arteries. And that burger is it's you should really be vegan, and the protein is bad and that's unethical. And the salad, well, you're not going to be full after that, so really you should go get a smoothie or whatever. Being not only told those messages subliminally, but like heavily indoctrinated to think that these choices are available to you, but are they really? And so I think that's something we just have to be really mindful of in saying like, yes, everyone gets to make these choices, is like, yeah. But also part of the responsibility in saying like, you are choosing this is like, how much agency do you really have in that? And in wanting to acknowledge that like, a lot of these conservative women that are being made fun of for how their makeup looks probably don't have moms that know how to do makeup very well, probably weren't going to watch YouTubers, like drag queens on YouTube doing makeup tutorials, which is how I learned how to do my makeup, right? Like, I don't know. There's just, I think it's important in this conversation that not only are we talking about like we all need to have access to these choices, but also like cutting people some slack in the places that it's like, even if it seems like they have a choice, do they really? And also acknowledging the ways in which we may not even be aware of the choices that were taken away from us because of our own blind spots.
Totally. And yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because this is not to say you're right or wrong, or this is the
Right.
wrong way to do things. Like it's about compassion, and it's about acceptance, and it's about no makeup, tons of makeup, long eyelashes, no eyelashes. It's not about. None of that matters. Like, do you? That's what I want. I want everybody to be free to do them. And if to my conservative queens out there, keep going. If you love it, love it. Like, you look beautiful. If it makes
you feel good.
You look beautiful. Like the hosts on Fox News, they're beautiful. I mean, and that's wonderful for them. But I also would love for them, if that's not who they are, to be free to be who they are, and to experiment and to explore and to have that freedom. I want people to choose. And you're right. Like, most people aren't able to choose because, it's easy to sit here and say that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Yeah, the difficulty too of hearing, like, I think this is where a lot of the, like, alienating someone comes in too, is like, but I just want you to make a choice, right? Like, but don't you see that these choices have been taken away from you? And then that person that you're talking to is, I think that puts up a barrier really quickly of like, no, I am an active agent. I am making this choice. Like, I am choosing this, right? And it's like, I can't really sit here and say, well, all of these choices have been taken away from you. See, like, you know yourself better than I do. But at the same time, have certain choices been taken away from people? Yeah, absolutely. So I think in having the conversation, like, you can't just sit there and say, no, but you actually were forced into this and indoctrinated into this, and that's why you think like this, and that's why you're wrong. That is not going to get you
right. No, it's patronizing,
anywhere.
Right?
Right.
It reminds me of the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago about severance. That was exactly what Outie Mark did to Innie Mark, right?
Yeah.
Oh, your life has been a living. I mean, and I don't ever want to do that, and I hope we don't ever come. I mean, we both have a liberal bent on things, obviously, or we wouldn't be doing this. But at the same time, I'm aware enough to say, you know what? Like, I'm not you, to the listeners. Like, if you're happy, who am I to say, no, you're not happy, or you shouldn't be happy? But I just want you to make that choice and realize that whether it was chosen for you or not, that you're comfortable with the choice you're making, and examine it and explore it. And that's all. Just have curiosity towards it. And I'd love to hear from you. And if anyone, and the time, the other thing is when it's like that idiom of when the student is ready, the master will appear, sort of thing. And at some point, an event will occur that maybe makes folks question things like, why do I do this? And if we're able to encourage that, awesome. That's all I want is to say, be you, because there's no one as beautiful and perfect as you are, period. Yeah. Like, I don't care race, creed, religion, political affiliation, any of that. You're beautiful, inside and out, period. Yeah, and I hope that's the message that comes across. Yes, I can be very provocative about things because I feel passionately about things when there's oppression, and that comes from my own background of being forced to, and how it feels to feel free of that and to live life much more authentically to who I am. That's what it is. It's about authenticity. So I think it's always great, and that's why I do love the Jezebel story, because she was authentic. No, I'm not here to say everything she did, at least in the narrative, was great. I mean,
she's not perfect.
She wasn't perfect, and she did things that could certainly be viewed as morally questionable or wrong. And not here to praise that and say that's how you should be, but I do believe she was authentic to who she was, for better or for worse, and that is beautiful in and of itself. Another interesting thing is I think you mentioned it at the beginning of the song, the Harry Styles song that mentioned Jezebel. This sexualization of Jezebel is something that's interesting, because there's never any mention in the Bible of anything sexual impropriety, anything in that way, that she was a loose woman or anything like that. But yet, notice how an empowered woman must be a slut. Essentially, like you can't be empowered and not be a slut. I mean, that's the message. Again, provocatively stating it, but it is about. It's just about being authentic, and I think that's my takeaway from our conversation today. In terms, and there's so much more. Maybe we'll even revisit this, because I feel like there's so much we covered, or there's so much more we could cover here. We kind of only got through the actual literal sort of what was in the Hebrew text, and not how we interpret. I mean, we sort of talked about interpretations today, I guess, but I don't know. I think that's my takeaway from today is looking at Jezebel and seeing it through a lens of authenticity, of her being who she was. And I love the defiance at the end, wearing her makeup and saying, you know what? And it reminds me of Glenn Close at the end of Dangerous Liaisons, which is a movie I've brought up before. But she goes out and at the end of the movie is mocked heavily, but she still keeps a bold face. But the end of the movie shows her slowly removing her makeup and a tear, I think, coming down, showing, and I don't know, I kind of get that same image from Jezebel. Like, I'm going to put on my makeup and I'm going to be defiant to the last. But what about the scared part of Jezebel? Like, she knew she was going to die, yet she was still brave. And I don't know, she was authentically her. And I think that should be honored. I don't know. How about you, Reese? What do you take away?
Yeah. No, I think that's just such a beautiful image, and it actually called to mind in the new Wicked movie, which is a masterpiece as a musical theater kid and the Wicked nerd. It was the first show I saw live and on Broadway, and I've been in love with it my whole life. It is just, please go watch it if you have not seen it, everybody. Please, please, please. I didn't dislike Ariana Grande before. I just wasn't like necessarily a fan, and so I was a little worried. Her performance is unreal, but I could talk about that movie forever. The scene at the Oz Dust Ballroom where Elphaba walks in with the black hat on and she's in all black and it just is silence. And she walks to the center of the... I'm going to start crying. She walks to the center of the dance floor and dances anyways. And we see the tear fall down on her cheek. We know that it's hard for her to do. But she does it anyways because she knows she can't not be herself. And of course, with Elphaba, it's harder because her skin is literally green, right? So it's like there is this added, like, it's actually impossible for her to mask in a certain way, the same way, which people of color experience as well. And anyone whose identity doesn't fit nicely within society's molds. But this idea that it hurts. It still hurts to, like you said, Jezebel must have been scared and afraid. And yet she still put on her makeup and stared out that window with bravery. And that's what bravery is, right? It's not feeling the fear. It's... I talk about her all the time. My acting mentor, Catherine Hart, she always said courage is not feeling fear. It is looking fear dead in the eyes and opening up your arms. Which, I'm like, that's what that is. It's standing in the middle of a circle of your peers, knowing that you are being ridiculed and judged, but you are still going to dance. And I think that is like the conclusion of this for me is like whatever that dance is to you, whether or not there are steps that you know, or you're just going to get freaky with it because you're a little freak Jezebel, like just dance. Just dance.
Awesome. No, I love that. I love that. What a way to end it. What a way to end it. And I hope we all need to do that a little bit more is just dance. I love it. Yeah. Well, so with that, gentle listener, we thank you for bearing with us yet another episode. Yes. As always, we go where we go, and but you'll make your meaning out of this as you choose to. But until next time, thank you for listening. We couldn't do it without you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Bow Down is a weekly podcast from the Cohere Collective that explores esoteric and empowered feminism.
Please subscribe to Bow Down wherever you may be listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a like, a 5-star rating, and a review. And if there's anyone you think would enjoy this episode, or maybe just needs to hear it, please share it.
If you want to stay up to date on all things Bow Down, you can follow the Cohere Collective on any social media platform at the Cohere Collective, and check out other content and offerings at www.thecoherecollective.com.
If you're interested in working with Reese to find and pursue your purpose, I encourage you to head to www.thecoherecollective.com/life-coaching.
If you're interested in working with Dennis to shed your mask and embrace your desires, you can email Dennis at dennis@theheartstoybox.com.
A huge thank you to Jack Corbett for Bow Down's music. You can find him on Instagram at j.corbe. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad you're here.
And as always, we hope you feel like you are living more coherently. And until next time, love.